back to the show with no name, second hour for Festivus, December 23rd, 2011. I'm Bob Going with Gavin Murdoch and Jim Nikosha. We're joined by our special guest city historian, Robert von Hesseln, who is promoting this week
Amsterdam Icons 2012 calendar.
Okay.
Very limited amount available. If you didn't get one under the tree for Christmas, you can still buy one at Amsterdam Free Library, the Bookhound, or Peddler's Wagon after Christmas. Or if you want, get out there today or tomorrow. And we've got about 20 or 30 left in those locations out of an initial run of 400. So we've done very well. All the money's going to local historic preservation efforts.
Very good.
And in addition to the pictures, inside you'll find dates. Interesting,
That's right.
amusing dates.
January 18th, I just pulled this at random. United Presbyterian Church fire in the year 2000. It's also the annual meeting of your organization.
Yes, first annual meeting coming up on historic.
The first annual meeting.
Yeah, we were only a year
You
old.
never had you've never had an annual meeting.
No.
Okay. 1939, 25 horses killed in the Hurricane fire. That was pretty bad. Yeah. Not that I remember that. Wow. What's your favorite date in here? Have you got a particular one?
Well, actually, one of my favorites is certainly one I picked up off of you when you were going through the items from the Walter Elwood Museum, the concert recital by Jan Paderewski.
Oh, yes.
I just saw that on, just as I was finishing up the dates for the calendar, I said, I got to get that one in, because it represents something about Amsterdam a lot of people just don't grasp anymore. This was a place.
This was a very, as I say in the first chapter of my upcoming book, what's the name of my book? Where Do We Find Such Men? I give a background of Amsterdam, and Amsterdam in 1940 had a very rich culture in every aspect. I mean, we would have national named lecturers come through here. Paderewski, my God, I mean, he was like the greatest musician in the world, and doing I think it was his farewell tour.
I think so, yes.
And his last stop on his farewell tour was Amsterdam, New York.
That was his last farewell.
And if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that he had left orders that his body would not be returned to Poland until Poland was free when he died. I think he died in France. And I believe they returned his body after Bonzo was president. Yeah.
Yes, it is!
Here's my favorite, March 27th.
Ah, Bridge Day.
Bridge Day in Amsterdam, March 27th. That's when the 1876 river bridge was washed out in 1913. They quickly put one up to replace it, and on the same day in 1914, it went down. And one of the pictures, I think it's the 1914 one, is on Mark Perfetti's Amsterdam site. It was a little hard to figure what you're looking at first, and then you realize these wires are dangling where the bridge used to be.
Yes.
And the Chalmers buildings are brand spanking new at the time. So they're in the picture. And they went up in like 1913, 14, right?
Right.
Or at the same time as the new bridge.
Yep.
So we had a bridge to somewhere.
Yeah, that bridge went somewhere, yeah.
Actually, that bridge had trolley tracks laid into it, although they never actually extended the trolleys to the south side. There was a plan to do it because Amsterdam was on the rise.
That's right.
So we're hoping to keep this up, and then every year we'll use it for different purposes. It might be to support a local museum or the library one year. This year, of course, it's going to City Hall. There are many, many different things we need to support around here. And as I said earlier, it won't always be old buildings. There's a lot more history to Amsterdam than just old buildings.
Oh, yeah.
So it might be sports, it might be one popular idea that's going around the HAL membership now is great eats, the great restaurants, the old-time restaurants.
Oh, that's what a lot of people talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, when I was shopping for Christmas, the thought occurred to me, what about all the old great stores? Some of which are, a few of which are still there. A few of which have moved just outside of the
very few are actually. You know, in preparation for to polish up my opening chapter, I was up at the History and Archives in Fonda last week, and got a list of the businesses that existed along the parade route from 1940 when the Company G went off to federal service, and just so I could. Actually, I did it because Tim Riley insisted that I put the Riley Brothers Funeral Home on Grove Street in the book, which I did. It's in there now. I'd forgotten they were on Grove Street at that time. But it was interesting. A couple of things I thought were there weren't there yet. The things like the Peter Schuyler Hotel, I thought that had been there forever when I was. It was already closed when I was a kid, right? But apparently it wasn't the Peter Schuyler in 1940. It was something else.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what
it was like the Milne Hotel or something like Milner or what do you think?
Barnes?
No, Barnes was a different place. No, this was on Market Street, just above the Republican headquarters.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about now.
Barnes was on Division.
And Michael Chiara's uncle had a shoe shine stand in the hotel.
I think there's a picture of it on.
It may actually be the same hotel that became the Peter Schuyler later. But do you remember the Peter Schuyler ever being open? I don't.
Never.
And of course, we know from the What's Wrong with Amsterdam from 1946 that.
We
said we haven't got any decent hotels in town, and it's time we all put in our money and bought one.
They put their money in, and
they put their money in and lost their shirts.
They bought the bridge.
On Main Street at one time.
What?
There was one on Main Street at one time, Amsterdam Hotel.
Yeah, and the Central Hotel was down by the railroad station on Railroad Street. The number of markets is just amazing.
Every block had them.
Yeah.
And then you have the small ones out on the corners in the trolley suburbs further down.
And it's funny how these things go in cycles. The neighborhood market disappeared when the supermarkets came in. And now they're really back in the form of the convenience stores at the gas stations, the gas marts. They're it's not quite the same, but it's they fill a lot of the same needs.
Except it's all auto-centric now, and then you've got to drive there, whereas in the old days you could just walk down to the corner and get what you want.
Yeah.
By the way, the calendars are going for $12, no tax.
$12, no tax.
Unless you're a GSAD or St. Mary's teacher, in which case there's a 25% discount if you get it at the Bookhound.
Okay.
And for Southsiders who don't feel like coming across the river, it's also available at Dolce Bake Shop.
All right, okay. They usually don't. They make people come to them.
Yes.
Those people.
The South Side will rise again.
Yeah, we already raised our airing of grievances about the supervisor-elect. So hey, what do you want to tell me about Mr. Lansing here? I know you gave me this for my book, but
yeah, I brought that in because it's very interesting, and not too many people have heard about this. People know that there was a ship, the USS Amsterdam, a light cruiser, named for the city during World War II, but not too many people know that there was a destroyer escort, which is a smaller, cheaper version of a destroyer, what the British used to call a frigate.
Yeah.
That was named after a aviation mechanics mate named William Henry Lansing, who is credited by the Navy to the city of Amsterdam. And all the sources say he was born in Amsterdam. I think he actually may have been born in Gloversville. But he grew up in Amsterdam. He graduated from Amsterdam High School and into the Navy from the city. And actually, he's not, he enters in 1933. He doesn't enter, he's a lifer. And was actually...
At the age of 19, from what I figure here.
Yeah. And he has an interesting career, which takes him eventually to the Aleutian Islands, right at the time the Japanese attack and seize Kiska and Attu Islands, part of the Midway campaign. And at that point, we've got no long-range bombers that can get to the Japanese. So this is one of those points where history comes together in very interesting ways. The commander of a Navy Catalina flying boat squadron decides he'll take his sea paint tender, send it out to a little island that's like halfway there, and then these Catalina bombers, which aren't designed for this kind of work, end up dive bombing the Japanese at Kiska.
Wow.
And over open sites. They don't even have a regular bomb site. They call it sailor's eyeball. And they're just kind of, if you don't know what a Catalina is, it's a huge, slow, high wing boat that flies. But it's the only thing available, so they just run these constant round the clock bombing. It's not easy to do because it's all cloudy up there.
I got everything. Thank you, though.
And one of the first casualties on the first day of operations is Lansing, who is described as a plane captain, which can either mean he was the flight engineer,
Doesn't have a smoke flavor.
or he may have been actually a naval enlisted pilot, which is a very unusual thing. I'm trying to run that down now. For a while, the Navy, in addition to having commissioned pilots, as we know now, actually had several squadrons of enlisted pilots, a practice they no longer use. So I'm not sure. The term plane captain can either mean he was an enlisted pilot who actually was in charge of the plane, even though his co-pilot might have been a lieutenant or an ensign, because he had more flying hours, or it could mean he was what the Air Force would have called a flight engineer. But he's described as dying at his station in the airplane during one of these dive bombing attacks on June the 11th, 1942, and the Navy decides to name one of its destroyer escorts after him. So
It's amazing. I never heard that story.
yeah. And where I was saying how things come together, some years ago I was researching, I was with the New York Military Museum at the time, and we knew about the guys in the New York National Guard. Army National Guard had won the Medal of Honors.
Right.
I had shown the New York Air National Guard that there was actually an Air National Guard officer who won the Medal of Honor. They had no idea. They never heard of him.
No kidding.
Yeah, a guy named Fred Castle, Castle Air Force Base, was named for him in California. He actually was a brigadier general leading a flight of, well, a large formation of B-17s, trying to drive the Germans back during the Battle of the Bulge. His plane was hit. So he tells everyone, bail out,
Right.
but I'm going to ride the plane down because we haven't dropped the bombs and I don't want the plane landing in American lines. And so he does. He actually pilots the plane into the ground just to make sure it clears American lines. And so the Army National Guard had its Medal of Honor winners. The Air National Guard realized it still had now had a Medal of Honor winner. But the Naval Militia, which again most people have never heard about, it's the Naval Reserve of the state of New York. I was looking around to see if there was somebody similar, and I came across the story of Leslie Garris, who was the captain in charge of the USS Benjamin Franklin, which was an aircraft carrier hit by kamikazes in 1945. And he manages to keep the ship afloat and get it all the way back to the Brooklyn Navy Yard for repair.
Yes. I've got some clippings on the Franklin arriving. That's incredible. They beat the crap out of it, and they still managed to get it from Okinawa to Brooklyn.
The captain was a guy from upstate New York, had actually been an enlisted man in the Naval Militia before World War I, went into the Navy in World War I and stayed, and then worked his way up. Well, where all this comes together is the captain commanding the wing, the wing that Lansing was flying for was Leslie Garris, the upstater who would eventually command the USS Franklin. So, and for years I've been trying to remember, what's the name of that captain? Which ship was he on? And then it just popped. I'm reading this and it says,
I know this guy.
yeah, and it all fell into place. It's like two birds with one stone.
Well, there was a similar thing happened to me because there was a fellow from Amsterdam. I think his name was William Sampson, if I'm not mistaken. Was a Navy flyer at Pearl Harbor. Okay, so he shows up early as one of the guys there. Mm-hmm. He also piloted the first American landing at Guadalcanal. After the Marines cleared the air base, he brings the Marine, Vandergrift. I don't know whether he was commandant at the time, but he was the
commanding general.
But he was in charge of the operations in the Pacific, I guess, of the Marines. And so he was Vandergrift's private pilot, landing at Guadalcanal. And then he shows up later, doing other stuff. Big job. Another guy from Amsterdam.
Amazing stuff.
I got a story in the mail a couple of days ago, which turns out I think that the guy is not from here, but somebody sent it to me, and it sounded really promising until I looked up the guy's obituary and found out he was from Washington State. But he was the guy who teletyped the German surrender. just an enlisted guy. But he was in charge of the teletype machine that had the top secret. The day before that it was announced, it actually leaked out all over the world, and the people were celebrating VE Day on May 7th instead of May 8th. And then, all hell broke loose in Europe because, like, the Russians hadn't been informed first or some crazy thing. So then the official announcement comes later, and then all the politicians denounced the AP for releasing it. But this guy was the guy who actually sat down and typed in the information that went to all the armed forces and to London, Moscow, and Washington.
It's funny. It kind of rings a bell somewhere. I remember some story about
The guy just died in July, so it might have popped up at the time. But what I got in the mail from a friend of mine included copies of the original documents that were sent out, which was,
I remember some story about the clerk typing up the surrender in Europe, being so nervous. In those days, of course, you didn't have photocopies. You had to put carbon paper in.
Yeah.
And you'd end up having like a sandwich of like 8 pieces of paper,
right.
7 pieces of carbon paper. He was so nervous he put in everything backwards. I mean, he'd been doing it for years. He types this whole thing in, runs it, gets run into Eisenhower, and Eisenhower's like, "What?
there's nothing here. Blank page.
You had to do it all over again.
Do it all over again." Yeah.
And you couldn't just push save and reprint.
Wow. And I forget. It was a big story for a day or two as to how the information got leaked.
Well, there was a false VE Day.
Yeah.
It actually came a couple of days earlier. Hey, we won. I went, wait a minute. No, we didn't. Not yet. Wait until...
It turned out it was correct, that they really had surrendered, but they kept the announcement back.
Well, one of the problems they had was that they'd always made such a big deal of the Allies are in this all together.
Right.
So the Germans were very, very nervous. They wanted to surrender to the British and Americans and hell with the Russians. So they actually did capitulate a day earlier than was announced, because then we had to call up Moscow and get a Soviet representative there and do the whole thing over again, so that they felt they were part of the process.
Yeah, I think I actually got a photograph of the first surrender.
Yeah, you had a chance to read talking about airplanes, crashes, the Pacific. Did you get a chance to read the book that Amsterdam Reads has selected this year?
I have not. I should get it. I should get it read before before I have to do the presentation in January. I've really been looking forward to it. And actually, any number of people have emailed me saying you got to read this book. Unrelated to the Amsterdam Reads.
You'll enjoy this as a historian. I read the book. This is the woman who wrote Seabiscuit. So I was like, okay, yeah, Seabiscuit, fine. Now she's going to write military history. And I went through that book waiting to find one little error, something that a civilian would get wrong, like the wrong designation of bomb. And at one point, I got it. She's talking about a plane that I know is supposed to be a B-24D model, because that's the plane he goes down in. And she's talking about the front turret gunner. And I'm like, that did not happen until the E model. It just used to be what they call a greenhouse, no ball bearing turret. And later on, I got it. Then about 20 pages later, the plane they had borrowed was one that they had experimentally fit the new ball bearing turret.
So she did a good job.
But that shows a pretty thorough job.
Pitch perfect.
Wow.
All the way through. And the story, I want to tell you.
See, stuff like that I worry about when I'm doing my book, that I'm going to come up with some. I caught one the other day. You know that 1906 Board of Trade glowing tribute to Amsterdam, and it tells you how many yards of carpet they made last year, go from here to Tokyo and back, and all that stuff. It suddenly just jumped off the page at me that there's, when they talk about where Amsterdam ranks in the number of cities in the country over 10,000, the whole paragraph is screwed up. It makes no sense whatsoever. One or more of the figures they give in the sentence is wrong, because it says there are like 150 over 10,000, and Amsterdam ranks 205. I said, what?
The funny thing is,
so I wrote sick in there.
Not a comment on the mental well-being.
Yeah.
Just using a Latin phrase, but I didn't write this.
Right. Well, I mean,
As it is, right? Or as is.
it's not my mistake,
Not
folks.
my mistake. Yeah, Latin for not my mistake.
Right.
It's funny though, because when you do history, those mistakes get carried down and repeated.
And after
Right.
a while, it
Over and
becomes
over.
fact.
They do.
Now, what I've been reading on my Kindle lately, I keep my Kindle with me in case somebody has a word they want to find, is Teddy Roosevelt's History of the American West. It's basically how the West was won by Teddy Roosevelt.
Right, yeah.
Great stuff. He was a really good historian.
He was.
Very thorough, and his footnotes are almost as big as a text because he takes apart exactly what you're saying, what other historians have said, and how foolish it is to credit something that was said 40 years after the event when the guy wrote a letter contemporaneously that said something different, and then how it carries on and carries on and carries on, and the mistakes just get multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. I did a couple of these I came across recently. There was always, in Manchester's book on MacArthur, American Caesar, he has a picture of a woman, I forget her name, but he has her as the common ancestor of Douglas MacArthur, Franklin Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill. And I always accepted that as fact. And then I said, you know, the woman didn't seem far enough back in history it was MacArthur's great-great-grandmother, but they have a photograph of her. She was still alive in like 1870 when they took the picture, which is, you know, hard to conceive that MacArthur's great-great-grandmother was alive as late as 1870 when he was born in like 1881, I think. Yeah. She was related to the other two, but she wasn't an ancestor of Franklin Roosevelt or Winston Churchill. And I decided to, you know, there's all kinds of genealogical stuff on the internet, so I type in this woman's name. Every reference comes back to Manchester. It's repeated over and over and over again, but it's all Manchester's mistake. And you go to any of the common genealogies of famous people like Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, and she does not show up as an ancestor of these guys. It's relative, no doubt, but not an ancestor.
You got to take everything with a big grain of salt until you get a couple of sources for it, because that's what happens. I was doing a piece on the Spanish-American War mobilization camp on Long Island, and somebody
was that Camp Upton too, or no?
That was no, Upton is World War I.
No, I know that. I just didn't know whether it was earlier too.
Camp Black,
Okay.
1898 on the Hempstead Plains, pretty much where Lindbergh will later take Walter to the
I know the area.
Roosevelt Field. And I was having trouble getting him to. Nobody wrote down where it was because everybody knew where it was. It was a big open plain, so all you had to do was look. There's nothing but grass out there, and all of a sudden tents. So nobody bothered to write down a description. So I had to go through all this detective work to try to figure out exactly where it was. And one of the things is the county historian wrote in his official history of Nassau County that there were 3 stone barracks. And I actually ended up tracing that back to a report in a local newspaper like the Recorder, the Hempstead Inquirer, that said, the Department of the Army, we're very happy to hear the Department of the Army is going to be erecting 3 stone barracks and turning it into a permanent Army base. It never happens. But people see that article, and then it's like, oh, there were 3 stone barracks. And then it's in Edmund Smith's book.
And where are they?
Yeah, Smith's is like the Dodlin of Nassau County, so it's like, oh, it must have been there. But they were never there. Happens all the time. You know the title, you're right about Teddy Roosevelt was a good historian. His book, the Naval War of
1812, yeah.
Still common.
It's astonishing. He wrote that when he was still in college.
Yeah.
Knew absolutely nothing about naval warfare. This was long before he became Assistant Secretary of the Navy and secretly giving the order to Commodore Dewey to attack Manila while the Secretary of the Navy was out to lunch. Knew absolutely nothing about naval warfare, but he went to all the sources, all the original sources, analyzed everything. He compared the throw weight of the different ships, and they said, well, it's commonly assumed that this bigger ship was more powerful, and it's amazing how the Americans were able to do it. But here's how it happened: because we had these weapons, and they had and
He figured it out.
as he says, it became on both sides of the Atlantic the definitive work on the subject.
Yeah, it still is.
He published the definitive natural history book of the Adirondacks when he was 17. He'd been studying since he was 12. Every summer he'd go up to the Adirondacks and collect his own specimens.
You know what his critics called his book about the Rough Riders in Cuba?
There's your
Yeah.
2 cents, right?
Alone in Cuba. by Teddy Roosevelt. He got us. He almost, that made his political career in some ways. After took him out of being just a New York figure to a national figure, but almost killed his career too.
It's amazing. He really was a national figure all his life. He had just everything he did in such a large way. Now, how many police commissioners of New York can you name? And yet, when he was police commissioner of New York, he was famous across the world.
He was famous for doing things like most police commissioners would just show up at the meetings. He'd go out in the middle of the night,
Right.
go looking for policemen who weren't doing their job.
Yeah. And
Thank you.
and he enforced every law. And then people say, well, this is a foolish law. He says, if it's a foolish law, get rid of it. And the best way to do that is to enforce it and show you how foolish it is. And that's what they did. And he got rid of corruption like crazy. Everybody was on the take in those days. They probably paid him
That's
20,
different
26
how?
Oh, it's much different now.
Okay, just checking.
When he was, what was he, Assistant Civil Service Commissioner in the Benjamin Harrison administration? It was the early days of civil service. Benjamin Harrison said of him,
It just happened.
now this is the President of the United States noticing the Assistant Secretary for Civil Service, which was not a cabinet position. It was, it was like, I don't know, noticing the Assistant City Engineer. He said, the problem with young Mr. Roosevelt is he expects to solve all the problems of the world between sunup and sundown on the same day.
He's a very
You see in his 20s at the time, and that was true of him his entire career. I can't believe the adventures this guy had. I read a couple of his adventure books before reading his histories.
I think my favorite Teddy Roosevelt quote is always going to be, Petticaris alive or Rasuli dead.
All right.
It's a case of
Yes.
The Wind and the Lion.
yeah, except they changed.
Yeah, well, they changed everything. Yeah. For one thing, Candace Bergen wasn't in the original.
No, actually, it was a man, not a woman. And it turns out later he may not have actually been a U.S. citizen, but the way it was reported is
Irrelevant.
this Berber chieftain kidnapped an American and sent a ransom demand to Washington that said, pay up or I kill him. And the answer came back, chieftain, captive alive or chieftain dead. That's all Roosevelt
I
would say.
wouldn't mind winning one of those.
And then the Marines went away. And we found out he wasn't even an American to begin with.
Well, but they thought he was at the time,
Yeah.
which was the point, that an American citizen is to be protected no matter where. Yeah.
That was Roosevelt. So, did you get back to Bob on the?
Well, I got back before you did, actually.
Oh, you did? You didn't copy me.
Well, I didn't know you were on it until I had already sent it to Cudmore. So I thought he would share it with you, but apparently he's courting it. So yeah, I got the email like instantly. I happened to check my email 2 seconds apart, and it comes in, and it happened that I had my book opened on my word processor, and I had already written the story, so I just copied it and sent it along. But it was the story is about Cudmore was approached by a South Sider and told about how this American bomber crashed on the South Side, and he thought it was like in 45 or 46 or 47. And in fact, it was in October 43, which is why Cudmore was looking for it but couldn't find the story. So I I had all the details for him, but it was just a great story. The captain ended up landing basically on Michael Chera's property.
Yeah.
The story, actually, it was Al Mancini who brought it up, former supervisor. And he said this sort of the way he heard it was that they had landed on Susie Sardonia's roof, who was Michael's uncle, and also lived on DeWitt Street. Michael's at the top of DeWitt Street on Montgomery. But it wasn't clear from the articles. All it said is they found the captain wandering around at the top of DeWitt Street when the fire department arrived, and the others landed in the Fifth Ward School.
Did you see the piece about the little second grader who found the captain?
Oh yeah. I included that too.
Good.
Peter Marcuccio.
Yeah, that's
I
a
think
good
it was,
point.
I think it was Peter.
Yeah, it was.
Peter Marcuccio. He was eight years old, and he found the captain's hat that had been with him through 108 combat missions in North Africa and Italy and Sicily, and he had lost it in the. He wore it on the way down, but he lost it on the way down. So then there's another story a week or two later, when the kid is awarded aviator's wings, which he wore for the rest of the war.
What a thought, though, that plane coming down and the escape hatch is found on Eagle, bam, smashes into Eagle
Well,
Street.
to put it, believe it or not, Amsterdam firemen happened to be outside the station hanging around when this happened. And the only ones who actually saw it. There were a couple of guys, I forget who they were, but they're in the book. And this is the old main station on Pearl Street. And and it's like, I don't know, 8 o'clock at night or something like that. And all of a sudden this plane it comes in low, and don't forget, this is during World War II, when they're, and then they can see that it crashes, and I guess they saw the parachutes too, but it crashed up like up by where the recorder is, before the thruway was built. But somewhere up in there, and the door ends up in the east end. The door they jumped out of, I guess they blew the door. I don't know how. You would know better than I, technically, how that's done. But
yeah, you just there's an old pop hinge on it. It comes right off, and you just throw it out
and jump.
It's moving fast enough that by the time you drop the escape hatch over Eagle Street, you're dropping out of the airplane over the south side, and then the plane continues on. I understand the pilot jumped at 500 feet. So
and of course by then they're approaching the hill. Yeah. Oh, he had quickly. Yeah. I mean, they crashed, like another 1,000 feet from there. So
They waited till the last minute.
basically, I guess they said it was like 1,000 feet behind the armory, so it was real close. It was the other side of what's now 5S wasn't there, I don't think, at the time, and the thruway wasn't there. That was all open space.
Yeah, I'm going to try to find out what kind of airplane it was. I assumed it was always a B-25 because it's described as a twin-engine bomber, but it could have been another one.
And they were just on a routine. They were going from Rome base to Schenectady and back, I guess, right? And they're on their way back from Schenectady, and I don't know, the engines went out, I guess.
Well, it kind of makes sense because Rome Air Depot at the time, their job was to fix engines and airplanes and then put them back into service. And I imagine the pilot and the co-pilot, having been already combat veterans, they were brought back and given an easy job of test flighting planes.
and I think it says in the article, or maybe you said it. It was the guy survives 108 combat missions. This is the only time he had to jump from the plane was over Amsterdam.
Yeah, it's from the recorder, and it has that kind of feel of like even then people were like, Amsterdam. What can I tell you?
Did you ever read Lindbergh's first autobiography, the one they put out right after he got back from Europe? It's the second one was The Spirit of St. Louis. That was more detailed.
The first one was We, wasn't it?
Maybe that's what it was. Yeah, I remember we had a simple title. Yeah,
it's We.
He's talking about his early career. He was jumping out of planes all the time. He would do the mail run from St. Louis to Chicago. Now, just imagine the primitive circumstances where there was, no instruments. If it got foggy, you're done. You know, I mean, yep. And there were several times where he had to jump out with the mailbag somewhere over lower Illinois. And the plane crashes, he lands, and then he goes to the nearest train station and puts the mail on the next cargo shipment to Chicago. But it happens over and over and over again. They barnstorming. They used to just go from town to town, land in some farmer's field, and everybody would come running to see what was going on, and then they'd collect like $6 for a plane trip, and that's how they bought the fuel to get to the next stop.
You know, funny thing is, a couple of days after this plane crashes on the south side, there's an article in the New York Times where one of the downstate congressmen is calling for an investigation. There are too many Army bombers falling out of the air. And it's not directly because of this, but because it's like, why are we having all these crashes? And it's, I think something comes out in your book, or at least you can see it in Honor Roll, is that you have so many young people learning to fly so rapidly.
And to repair the planes.
But not only that, don't forget these planes many of them were designed during that time period. So you got people who have never designed them before designing them. You got people building them who have never built them before, and you got people training. They'll do like 6 weeks of training, and then they become the instructor if they get an A in the course for the next group coming in, because we went from a zero Air Force to how many planes did we end up making? It was thousands and thousands.
50,000 a year.
Yeah.
Look in your book how many those who died in World War II died here in the States in some sort of training accident.
Well, the 1943, which I called the year of the airplane in my first book, it was incredible when you start lining them up one after another, after another, after another, after another, and you see there really was a big problem. And if it's only, the guy next door, it's a tragic accident. But when it turns out to be thousands of people and they never even get into combat, it was a pretty awesome problem.
It's actually more interesting than the fact that this crash occurred is that there weren't more of them, because we were actually on a major airplane route here. We had Rome Air Depot.
Yeah. Oh, more of them didn't happen here.
Yeah. They're testing airplanes over the Hudson and Mohawk valleys, and then returning them onto operational bases. You had Mattydale, which in Syracuse, which was a major transport point for naval aircraft. Planes being flown out of Buffalo, the Curtiss plant.
My mother-in-law, before she got a medical discharge, but she was training to transport aircraft within the country from one place to another. The thing the women were doing that is a story not oft told, I think.
The Wasps?
Yeah. Well, she was away.
She did a lot of flying. She did a lot of flying.
The only other crash I know of during the war was a Navy plane that went down in Minorville, about 41. That's the only one I know of. So you get into the late 40s, and then you got...
There was... Mike Mancini's uncle, in fact, was killed flying out of Springfield. Not Springfield, but the base near there. Westover? Westover. Flying out of Westover, and then, training flight, they hit a mountain in Vermont, and everybody's killed,
Hey, Yakshamash.
But it was...
How you doing?
Hundreds of them going down.
Yeah, it's a very little known aspect of it. And so many people died, not in combat, but actually just in routine flying or training. Difficult times.
But you look at those planes, there's nothing routine about them.
No.
We were, one year we took some of our students to Australia, and we went to their air museum there, and we had a chance to get in a couple of their bombers from World War II. They were like a Volkswagen. There was just nothing to them. You've got the cables, you got the wires, you got the skin about a quarter of an inch thick, and you see in the movies these guys have the leather jackets. Man, they had to have them because they were just flying below zero weather up there. There's no heat in those things, and they were so tiny. They had the belly gunner there, and he could barely get into it and everything else. It was just incredible. It was the first time that I and our students had an experience that wow, how tough it really was. I mean, they were in tin cans is what they were flying in.
Sam Bilardi, who used to play the violin in the summer recreation shows here, when he was in the war, I forget, it was one of the fighters, one of the P-something fighters. His job was to lean out the bomb bay and take the pictures. You know, so when you're up there, it's freezing cold, and then when the bomb bay opens, you know, if it wasn't bad enough that the shrapnel could go through the through the plane, you're just standing there waiting for it to come hit you.
You too.
And he said we really should rig up a way to take the pictures remotely so that you don't have to do it. Engineer said couldn't be done. So Sam figured out how to do it, and they refitted every one of the fighters in the European theater according to his design.
Same to you,
And he's
Ron.
just
Bye-bye.
you know, simple mechanic from Amsterdam, New York, who
Saw a problem,
saw a
wanted to
problem
fix it.
and wanted to fix it bad.
If you want to experience the airplanes, every year down in Schenectady at the airport, they bring in the fighters and the bombers for review.
I got to fly on one of them one year. I was doing a welcoming speech for the B-17, and they were like, "You want to go?" And I'm like, "I don't got $300," because that's what they were charging. And I'm like, "Get on board." And you know that scene in the beginning of Best Years of Our Lives where they're flying into Boone City?
Yeah.
Well, I got to sit in the front of a B-17 and imagine I was a character in Best Years of Our Lives flying back into Albany Airport.
Yeah.
I flew
What a
in one
sight.
up in Lake George. They donated one to the Air National Guard up there for a trainer, and I made an intercom for the airplane, so they took me up, flew me around the mountains. What an experience! What an experience!
I think I may have uncovered some fraud from World War II.
Really?
It's probably a little late to do anything about
No
it. now.
statute of limitations.
Yes, statute of limitations, and I'm pretty sure everybody involved is dead. But as part of the war bond drive, the different communities and organizations would raise enough money from war bonds to build a bomber. And Amsterdam raised enough money to buy a B-17F. And when they rolled it off the line, and there's painted on the side, "City of Amsterdam, New York," on the side of the plane, you know, like the Memphis Belle. I knew that story, but then I found out later that the community where we sit, the Fourth Warders, raised money just from the Polish community here, enough to buy 2 more bombers. One of I think was called the Polish Pride of Amsterdam, New York, and I forget what the other one was. Was very similar. Well, I got a friend who's a military historian. In fact, he was the editor of Military History magazine for a while. And I said, "Are there any books to find out what happened to these planes?" He says, "Yeah, let me take a look." And he reports back to me that there's no record of any of them. They have them both under their serial names and their pen names. And I've come to the conclusion that they were painting these planes over and over and over again, sending the pictures to the folks back home, and we can't tell you what theater it's operating in, but thank you very much for your contribution.
You mean like the way they fly the flags over the Capitol?
Yes,
up and
exactly,
down.
exactly. Assuming they even do that. Yeah.
Three flagpoles, no waiting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. How late in the war was it?
Well, the first one was in like 43, and I think the other two were maybe 44. When did the B-17F come out? Because I think it was that came out during the war.
Yeah, that was operational late 42, early 43.
Yeah, so that'd be about right for the city of Amsterdam. It was 43 sometime, and I think the other two were 44, maybe even early 45.
So I was also wondering if it may have been a number that was allocated but not actually built.
Well, there were pictures of them. I've seen the
That's why
photographs. Oh yeah.
Painted a name over and we
Yeah.
painted another name over.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it was before Photoshop, so they probably actually had to really paint them.
No, I can imagine a guy just standing. His job all day is like paint the city out.
Right.
Take it off, paint it
Well,
up.
because they had guys whose job that way. When the new pilot came on, they paint his name on it. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
I'm sure when these ships got out to their operational assignments anyway, if the pilot wanted to call it after his girlfriend.
Well, of course, the Enola Gay, for example.
Yeah.
The Enola Gay was not the city of Amsterdam, New York, but it may have been at one time.
But I'm glad you remind me because there's a C-130 right now called the City of Amsterdam. I should try to make sure that when she goes out of service, it comes to us.
C-130 out of Schenectady,
Yeah.
I believe.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah,
City of Amsterdam.
that was only 4 or 5 years ago.
And
Wow.
the Air Force has a program where you can, and so does the Army and Navy, you can have a property declared a historical property even before it goes out of service, so that in the supply records, in the supply chain, it's noted that when this thing goes, don't sell it to Kuwait, don't scrap it. It's going to go to the City of Amsterdam.
To our airport.
Or Veterans Field. They're big. But
Where was I reading? I was reading about the I can't remember where I was reading it. Maybe it was something you wrote. I don't know. The first airplane to fly over the Mohawk Valley.
Yeah.
And
And
it-
also in the
Oh,
calendar.
that's where that must be where I saw it. Yeah, okay, it was in the calendar. So that would have been like 1908,
1911, actually.
1911. Right, and I know why I had 1908 in my mind. 1911. My father-in-law told me about that. He was a kid, and he remembered that. He was born in 1902, so he would have been 9 years old when that first airplane, when he saw and I didn't realize it was a Wright plane.
Wright B.
Yeah.
Which is not much more advanced than the one that they flew with Kitty Hawk. I mean, it has a little skid,
Yeah.
a little tail surface to help them navigate. But basically, you were lucky if you. A good flight would be, gee, we got it up in Fonda and we made it to Amsterdam. Let's stop, set it down, rebuild it, gas it up, and maybe we'll get to Albany if we're lucky. And this guy was this was considered a land-breaking flight. He was going from Buffalo to New York City. It was like incredible. Who could ever think airplanes could fly that far? Came over about 500 feet. Factories let out, the whistles went off, everybody went up. Look at this airplane, just the first one they had ever seen. I think I know why you're thinking of 1908. That's, I think, the date of the first airship, or the first.
Oh no, I was thinking 1908 because I was thinking how old my father-in-law would have been at the time, or that it was 8 years after the first Wright brothers flight, which was similar.
The first airship to go down the Mohawk was actually built by the guy who created Jello.
Knox?
Yeah, Knox.
Yeah.
Knox.
They own a whole bunch of
Yeah.
property up in
Johnstown.
Pasico.
He was crazy about airships, and which were all the rage back in the turn of the century. Zeppelins and Santo Dumas sailing over Paris. So he built a Knox gelatin airship, and got it up in the air.
Yeah.
Flew it around the Fulton, Montgomery County Fair a couple of times, and then took it out to air shows around the country. But the first heavier than airplane was 1911.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And then early on, there was an airport near the Antlers Golf Course somewhere,
Right, which
probably around where the I don't know, but probably where the National Guard
There's one up
training
there.
ground
There's
is.
up there. There's an airport up there.
And then there was one over by St. John's Cemetery off of Widow Susan Road. One of my wife's older relatives told me about. They remembered planes taking off from there. And there's one in Perth too.
There's one in Fort Johnson. It's still there.
Yeah.
There's an airport still in Fort Johnson.
Well, there's the real airport.
No, not the one up. Not Fulmont.
There's still a private one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's the one the Civil Air Patrol used to
Yes.
operate out of.
Yeah.
I flew in there a couple of times.
I don't know if
soloed up there.
I don't know if I told you this, but I've got in my possession a radio program that was done on WGY, sponsored by the Civil Air Patrol of Amsterdam, or Montgomery County, Amsterdam, I guess, and it's a little soap opera type type show, and it was a series. And I've got one episode because I guess one of my grandfather's relatives was in it or something. I've got the marked up script. I got to bring it in. We got to do that. We got to play all the parts. Well, little Jimmy, what do you think of the Civil Air Patrol? Well, gosh, Mom. Great stuff.
As I recall, the early commander in the 50s was a noted aviator from World War I. We had several of them too, including you go by the French method of counting aces. We had an ace here.
What's their method?
They would
You fly in
Ours was 5, right?
5. Germans were 10, and I think for a while the French were authorizing ace status at 4.
Charlie Westfall, remember Charlie Westfall? He was president of the Downtown Amsterdam Association for years, and Westfall's father.
Yeah.
He was a flyer in World War I. I couldn't believe it. He took me out to a Rotary lunch one day, and they had these sugar packets with World War I airplanes on them. He said, "Yeah, I used to fly one of these." I think, this guy was in World War I. I can't believe it, let alone he was a flyer. But my grandfather's brother, Ray Nichols, he was a flyer too. I've got his aviator's ring in his wings.
Yeah. This guy was James Ferguson, and he actually didn't fly with the Lafayette Escadrille, but very interesting. He was one of the first American pilots to get over there. So he was assigned to one of the leading squadrons of the French Air Service, the Tswnn squad, the Cygnets, the Tswnn squadron, led by several French aces, and he flew the war with them. He never served in an American unit. American wearing an American uniform, but he flew Newport 27s with the Swans, the Storks, rather, I should say.
My friend I was telling you about earlier, the military historian, he specializes in World War I fighter planes, aircraft. He's written several books on the subject, and he did one of those a couple of years ago. Remember they were recreating the dogfight. It was called Dogfights, right? The series on the History Channel. Yeah, he was on a couple of those. One of them, they flew him out to California. Recorded like 15 hours over 3 days or something like that, paid all his expenses and all that stuff. They used like 20 seconds in the show. And I think he did the Lindbergh show too, and he actually appears on camera in that. And I think it was Peter Jennings, I think, was the narrator of that. Might have been Brian Williams. I always confuse those two guys. It was Jennings. Pretty sure he was still alive. And John is on, a little bit, maybe 5 minutes out of the program. But virtually, he told me afterwards, virtually everything that came out of Peter Jennings' mouth was his interview. Did you see the non-show I did last week with noted presidential historian David Petrusha?
Yes. That was really good.
That came out really well. I was surprised. He's hired me to do another.
Oh, really?
Another presentation on a different book.
Yeah.
Very good book, 1948. I finally got around to sort of reviewing it or plugging it anyway.
You gotta get him on the show.
Well, I keep trying to get him, but he's busy. He's busy. Yeah, I know. I thought, he's
National best-selling author.
He is.
That'd be a scoop for the show with no name to get a scoop
Well,
like that.
listen, I already scooped C-SPAN. They had their cameras there, and I got it up on the YouTube before they did.
Yeah.
So, by the way, technologically doing this show has gotten substantially easier because YouTube apparently has made me a producer, which means that I can upload longer than 15 minutes, which everybody else is limited to. And I don't know what my limit is, but the Petrusha show was just under an hour, and it went up flawlessly. I just hit the share with the YouTube button, and it did everything automatically, high quality, and came out really well. I forgot how many freaking gigabytes it was, and it's up on YouTube. So that's what we're going to do with our shows from now on. That's why I broke this into 2 segments in case I'm limited to an hour. You know what the reason for this is? Why I got upgraded to producer?
No, Bob, what is the reason?
Because I have so many hits on my videos. I'm also eligible for sharing advertising.
You know how tired my finger is to keep going there all day long?
No.
Going on different times,
No.
same one?
The key,
Unique?
the key
Okay.
is the father-daughter dance at my daughter's wedding. Now, apparently, a lot of people search father-daughter dances when they're planning their weddings.
No.
So they go to YouTube,
Yeah.
they go for father-daughter dance, and they, you know, I've got like 75,000 hits on that stupid thing. And the other one is my the Latin declension video that I did in my office one day, recording the first part of Sister Anna Roberta's.
Yeah.
Now in Latin there are only 5 declensions.
All the others.
That is now shown in in Latin classes all over the world. People they're teaching the kids, and they have to get up and sing it in front of the class, and I'm getting all these nasty notes from kids saying your teacher made me sing this.
I think I was one of the last public school students to actually take Latin. What a fascinating education that was.
It is a fascinating education, and you're really, if you don't have it, you really miss out on a lot, both in understanding the English language, from which we get about 25% of our words from the Latin, and just the cultural stuff. As an example, back around 1974, I'm substitute teaching for an extended period of time at the then Wilbur H. Lynch Senior High School, right? I don't think you were there then.
I
Were
was
you?
still
74?
No, I was
73, 74?
graduating from college, going to Indians.
Yeah, right, because I was just out of college,
Yeah.
right, and you were a year behind me. So anyway, it turns out I'm going to be doing like half of a quarter for an English teacher, so I decided to teach them Julius Caesar because apparently their Shakespeare had been woefully so these are Regent seniors, okay, not doing any Shakespeare at all, which shocked me, and they had never done Julius Caesar, which is a fairly easy play to do, and it's got a lot of interesting nuances to it. Regents, seniors, these are the smart kids, right? Kid raises his hand and says, Mr. Goring, he says, was Julius Caesar a real person, or did Shakespeare make him up?
Good question.
Well, I guess he missed history class too.
But to think that you can get to be 17 years old and not understand, wow.
Do you remember the first thing you read in Latin?
Omnes Gallias divisit on partes tres.
The Gallic Wars, Julius
That's right.
Caesar.
Yeah, all Gauls divided in three parts.
One of which is inhabited by the Aquitani, another the Belgi, and the third, those who in their language are called Celts, but in ours, Gauls.
Actually, the first thing I read was The Three Little Pigs.
Oh.
And because a lot of Latin, we do get some Latin plays, there's some Latin social commentaries, but a lot of Latin comes down, it's engineering and military texts. So when they didn't just translate, they transliterated The Three Little Pigs.
Yeah.
So instead of saying the big bad wolf ate the three little pigs, it says, and the wretched little porkers paid for their laziness with their lives.
Well, the stuff Sister Anna Roberta used to do with the popular songs that were translated into she translated into Latin was Three Blind Mice became Tres Mures, Three Mice. The Old Gray Mare. O equa prisca non esquiantegra.
Yeah. And then you had to pay Sippy, and we could get a Latin Club meeting and
That's
get
right.
off topic.
That's right. Sippy.
Sippy.
That's
Hey,
right. I was
Sippy.
thinking it was named Sambo. It was Sippy.
Sippy.
Yeah.
Sippy. So everybody made sure they had money every
Right.
day. Just
It was one of those little mechanical coin things where it was a
bear.
Yeah, it wasn't a ball and bat thing, was it?
No, I think it was a bear. And if you had money and you fed Sippy, make your donation.
Then you get to do an extra Latin club or something.
Yeah, you got this. We get her off track was the idea.
Oh, yeah. You got
But
it.
the one thing.
And of course, every time we thought we were getting her off track, we were learning more Latin than we would have otherwise.
The one thing that was tough in her class was that You sat according to how well you were doing in the class. And so you would start a lesson and you'd have a story. And every day she'd start it with the kid who was the smartest, who had the best grades, and they'd go through it. And the farther into the story you got, the less we'd gone over it. So where they got to me, I could never get out because we never got to that part of the story, and I didn't have a clue. Then you go back to the beginning, and the smart kid got that again, and you worked your way through. So once you got
So was Tommy Alberton. Tommy Alberton was always in the first seat, first row.
Kind of sounds like.
Val Albert, come Val, because he was valedictorian.
Anyway, I hate to break this up, but I want to keep this. Oh, wait a minute. No, I got the wrong. Yeah,
about
this is
there.
it. Okay. Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy Festivus, those of you who celebrate. It's part of our heritage. And we'll be back again next week with more of the show with no name.